Good afternoon, everybody. This is Rich Sutter. I'm with Pete Coles, and you are in the zone. It is a scorching 90 plus degrees here in beautiful Westfield, Massachusetts. We are back on our Thursday schedule. It's noon, and today is the 7th of September. I know. Summer's over. We're all sad, but fall's been beautiful so far. But when you see the football teams return and you see the students return to campus, you can officially know that summer's over. Time to get back to work.
Yep.
Time to get back into the flow. But on the flip side of that, that's what makes In the Zone go. That's what makes us go. That's our gasoline. That's our energy. That's our fuel. And the basketball season is upon us. I saw somebody post the other day that it's just a short, under 60 days away from the tip off of college basketball season. That's exciting. All different starts and stops, but right now on campus, and probably for most of the summer, you've had a lot of the Division One teams practicing, working out, keeping their players in class, keeping their players in good rhythm as far as basketball goes. A lot of skill development, a lot of lifting, a lot of good stuff in and around the game as well. So today we wanted to feed 'em fish, and we wanted to jump right in, Pete, because we now have what I consider to be a threat to college basketball and consider it to be a threat to college athletics in general. And we're going to start there, and we're going to blast off from that spot and a couple of other things that we wanted to bring in to feed 'em fish today. But first, we wanted to talk about this.
Coming in hot and heavy then today.
We're coming in hot and heavy, and it's September. I'm excited. It's a great time of year for sports. My God, college football, pro football, basketball is getting ready to kick. So to say that I'm pumped up is besides the point. But here's what I'm pumped up about today: conference realignment. It's been going on for quite some time, and I think that this one might have taken the cake.
Really?
We have Cal, Stanford, and SMU all going into the Atlantic Coast Conference now. Atlantic
Okay.
Coast
So the
Conference
names don't mean squat.
with two West Coast teams and a team from Texas. So, how did we get here? We'll talk about that a little bit right now. We talked about this a little bit in a microcosm when we discussed Notre Dame football in general. A couple of times on the show, we've alluded to Notre Dame having that independent television contract and then the television people being heavily involved in Notre Dame's program. Now you're seeing that extrapolated out to the entire landscape of college athletics and to college football, most notably. So here's what happens. The Atlantic Coast Conference gets a call from the television people. The television people say that we're going to drop your revenue if you don't maintain X amount of teams. Now, this isn't just a conversation happening within the Atlantic Coast Conference. This is a conversation happening with all of the conferences now, some who will be adding teams and growing financially, and some who will be losing teams and will then bear a penalty in the television contract exchange because they're not going to get the marquee games. They're not going to get the big CBS, NBC, those marquee games that are on in the afternoon that most people are going to watch. That's what made Notre Dame football what it is today. Well, everybody's looking for that now. And conferences are looking for that in large. And so what happened was somebody must have tapped on the shoulder of the commissioner of the Atlantic Coast Conference and says, you need to add teams. Why that conference needs to add teams right now is beyond me. They've already decimated the middle of their conference, and the lower end of their conference is decimated and been relegated, honestly. But I don't understand all of that. I cannot for the life of me understand why the people on the West Coast would want to, because they're the ones who are going to bear the biggest burden.
Right, because they're going to have to come east all the time, right?
Right. When you go from North Carolina State to Durham, or you go from North Carolina State to Chapel Hill, that's easily done on a bus trip. There's no need to stay over. North Carolina and Duke are literally 15 miles from each other,
Right.
20 miles from each other. There's no need for them to stay over or get in a plane or do any of the things. Every single time that those teams have a league contest, they're going to be coming from the West Coast to the East Coast. Time changes, hotel stays, on the bus, off the bus, back to the airport, back to the hotel,
They think they're a pro team or something?
go to practice.
Seriously.
Well, essentially, how do you figure that you could accomplish all of that and still have those students in class?
Right. Right, yeah, exactly.
Simple question. How did somebody figure that they could do that? Who said okay to that?
That's like if you have a Saturday game, you're leaving on a Thursday because you don't want to fly in the day before and have a bad night's sleep. So you're flying on a Thursday, so that means you miss Thursday, Friday. You probably fly back, depending on the time of your game, either Saturday night or Sunday morning. And who knows if you're going to be ready for Monday morning class.
There's another piece that's added to this. My friends in the business call it the John Thompson rule, because John Thompson was scheduled to play a game in the league against a team, and there was a snowstorm that was pending. And John Thompson, according to folklore, didn't want to play the game because it was jammed up in his schedule. It was a tough league game, and he just didn't want to go. So what he did was he waited for the storm to hit, but he didn't have his team in the opposing city. Now it's mandated your team is in the opposing city the day before. So Duke and North Carolina are within 15-mile radius of each other. They're in the day before by just virtue of their geographic location.
Sure, yeah.
But now, if you're Cal, you're going to need to be in Durham the day before. You're not going to be able to get in there at the same day of the game. Every single one of your sports will need to be in there the day before.
That's an enormous amount of money.
It's exorbitant,
Seriously.
but they're doing it because the money will be made up on the other side. I assume. I thought the schools out west were doing okay as far as that's concerned. I really didn't think that conference realignment to that extent was anywhere near necessary. And now, I'm going to say this to the NCAA people: you are making regular season games absolutely meaningless. You are making regular season games meaningless to the average fan who now can't keep up with all of this alignment, can't keep up with all of the portal stuff, can't keep up with all of the NIL swirling around it, and also can't keep up with the amount of coaching changes that happen on a given year. Basically, the whole thing is in constant flux and movement right now, and you're going to lose your average fan because they can't keep up with that. It's impossible for them to maintain that basic knowledge that they like to have when everything is constantly moving, when everything is constantly shifting. And now you're going to have this huge amount of money that's thrown around too, and that's never really good anyway. But we jumped off in feed 'em fish with that. I want to shift now to the regular season that's coming up on us. I want to talk about a little bit about some of the great players that I think we're going to see come up this season. Who are the best players right now in the game? And I think it's an exciting basketball season upon us because there are some really good, exciting players that have returned, and there's some really good players that are on the move. And then you always have that new freshman class where they're considered the one-and-dones and the great players that have been recruited and everybody expects to see them go. that's almost a sport within itself, to watch the one and dones and to see what happens with them. And yep, he got to go one and done, and nope, he's going to be there for 4 years, and that's almost a sport within itself within this whole thing. But one of the things I wanted to talk to everybody about today was we got the laptop in here. We've got
you're going high tech today.
We've got the phone out, and we've got passwords rolling, and we got all sorts of stuff. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was some of the things that are going on with the current players right now. Who are the best players in the game individually? So we've got all of this stuff working, and I just wanted to crash into it right away. So if I was to ask you, Pete, who do you think is the best player to come back to basketball this season? Who would that person be?
In what capacity?
College basketball. Who's their number one guy right now? Who's the marquee guy in the game right now?
I don't know if I could tell you.
No, I'm going to tell you who this is listed as, all right? This is, they're listing Zach Edey as number one. That's our guy from the draft. I thought he got kind of sandbagged out of the draft by some of the talk that was around his positioning. I couldn't imagine that young man would last 10 positions in the draft. But before we jump into that, we're going to go into the players, but I wanted, because my computer's here now and I got it, and it might bounce out just a tiny little bit at it, but I wanted to talk about some coaching salaries. And I wanted people to hear some of the salaries of some of the coaches that are in the game right now. And when you see some of the money being thrown around here in different ways, it's going to be really, really interesting to see. There were coaches on wiretaps that it was alluded to the fact that some of them had outsourced their dollar operations, and some of them had kept them home. And so when you see some of the salaries of some of these coaches, you might be looking to see, wow, maybe you could start your own NIL little operation here with some of these salaries. The number one coach salary now we're talking about Mike Krzyzewski had retired. So for many, many years, he was the Duke, the crown prince of the game. His salary when he left was somewhere in the vicinity of $9 million. The entire Duke basketball operation, salary-wise, with Coach K, was in excess of $11 million. So wow. Today's dollar guy is Kansas's coach, Bill Self. Now, you can agree or disagree with the amounts, but if you think about who's listed here, you can certainly see that they're paid according to kind of who they are, what they've done, and what
for their
they've
name,
accomplished.
image, and likeness.
The numbers might seem staggering to people, but let's roll. Bill Self is in for $10 million per season at Kansas. Kentucky in the SEC, John Calipari, 8.6. Michigan State is Tom Izzo in the 3-hole. Mr. Izzo is somewhere in the $8 million range. John Shire from Duke. The salary stayed pretty high. I assume their operational costs remained as well pretty high. He's in the $7 million range. Mick Cronin from UCLA. So as you see, what we're talking about here is, let's just take the first 5 or 6 mentions: Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan State, Duke, UCLA.
Top conference.
Those are the big dogs. They're all in the big conferences, and that's who's running the show, ruling the roost right now. Texas was Chris Beard. They're not showing the new coach's salary up here, but Mr. Beard was a very significant salary. I wonder if somebody paid me $6 million to coach basketball, I promise you I'll be a Boy Scout. I promise you'll never find my name in the newspaper. If you're going to offer me $6 million to do something that I love and something that's an unbelievable honor, really, believe me, at $6 million, you'll never catch me in trouble. I promise you that. As we go
Is
again.
the new coach Rodney Terry?
Yes.
So
Rodney
there's a
Terry.
headline saying that they hired him on a 5-year, the $15.3 million contract. So $3 million,
Okay.
$3 million a year.
So $3 million a year. That's, he was the
He's a
interim
bargain.
coach. He was the interim coach. Took over the team during a tough shot. When the previous coach gets fired, most of the players are recruited by that coach. It's a difficult time. And I thought Coach Terry did an exceptional job with that team this year. And I think he'll do fine moving forward. $3 million. There's probably some other dollars around there floating around that aren't visible
Yeah.
right now. But
Yep.
when the whole thing comes out, I'd say he's going to be in the $5 million range before that's over. I was a little surprised by number 8, Villanova. Villanova in the Big East. Catholic schools notoriously don't like to pay those big dollars. They don't have the wherewithal to pay those big dollars, but some of them have got caught up in this game, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 Villanova. TCU at 9, I was a little surprised by that. Jamie Dixon. Jamie Dixon, formerly the coach at Pitt. Kevin Willard at Maryland is in the 10th spot. Now we got Huggins is still listed here as the coach, so no idea what they gave the new coach on the interim, but I can assure you that they came on the cheap on that one.
Yeah, sure.
Patrick Ewing also fired. Ed Cooley probably in for a little bit more than Ewing was. You probably had Ed Cooley going in for about $6,000, I would say. Ewing they have listed at $4 million. I'd say you'd get him at $6 million somewhere. That would be just a guess. Buzz Williams at Texas A&M, one of my favorites in the game. Excellent coach. Arkansas, Eric Musselman. All of a sudden, you're going to see the SEC coaches go boom, boom, boom. Arkansas, Auburn, Bruce Pearl, very well compensated. Now we go West Coast, Oregon. Dana Altman is in the 16th spot. A little surprised by that. Tony Bennett, a little far down, I would say, for his abilities, but you have to work within the framework of where you are and what you are. Pitt coach Jeff Capel, very, very well paid. Next, Baylor has Scott Drew. Nebraska, Fred Hoiberg. Illinois, Brad Underwood. That rounds out a pretty good group. Juwan Howard down here at Michigan is way down here at the bottom, but I also see Ed Cooley listed on the list here for Providence, so this list is a little bit old. So the conference realignment part, Pitino had opined pretty vociferously on the conference realignment part. Again, it also has to be I think there's a bit of hypocrisy also, because he was alluding to the fact that now we have those teams moving. Obviously, that places Pitino's conference in a little bit of a deficit now.
I mean,
The Big East just took a shot because the ACC stepped up, flexed their football muscles, and now they got 3 more teams, and they're going to have West Coast games. They're going to have teams that are out on the West Coast. So the East Coast people that are sitting here are going to be sitting up to 11 o'clock at night to watch their teams play as well.
Wasn't the whole point of conferences to have them be regional so that teams could play against other teams and not be a huge cost to a school?
Everything used to be regional, Pete, and it's not anymore. But I want to get back to Pitino because Rick Pitino was the same guy, I think, that coached Louisville in the Big East. So this has been going on for a while. I understand he was talking about 2 Greek teams joining the NCAA ranks. He was speaking facetiously, of course, but you also have to consider the source. Some of those teams were already coming. Xavier's located in Ohio. They're in the Big East. Marquette is located in Wisconsin. They're in the Big East. And this has been going on for years and years and years. Atlantic Coast Conference now has Syracuse and Pittsburgh in it, and Louisville. They're not Atlantic Coast Conference traditional teams. And what's happened is they've grown too big because most of those teams, they're going to be well paid, but it's going to be very difficult to maintain a standard of play. It's like saying you're a football team and you have 10 guys and they can run really fast. The problem is you have 100 guys on your team. And so the rest of those players aren't going to be very fast. They're football players. So you have 10 guys that are really, really fast. But the same thing happens with a conference. 10% of your conference will be really good, really liquid, really fast, and nationally ranked, nationally noted. The middle of your conference is going to turn to linguine, okay? And I don't mean al dente. And the bottom of your conference is turning to mush. And if you want to take a look at it, look at Syracuse's basketball program right now. Look where they are. Rutgers joined the Big Ten. Now, they've had some great recruiting success, but they, in any of the sports that they have never cracked into the Big Ten and been a factor in any of the championships or any of the regular season stuff that goes on there. So you've seen all these teams move around. I would ask anybody who watches in the zone, send me back a team that really has benefited from all that movement. Pete and I opened up the show
Yeah, I don't see.
with the deleterious impact that it's going to have on the student athletes. And also the fan base. The fan base wants to watch games. Is the fan base that used to watch Wake Forest, and they could travel up to North Carolina State in a very, very short amount of time. Are they going to fly to Cal now? Are they going to Stanford now? Are they flying into Texas, SMU, to Dallas to see SMU? Now, you picked up a couple of nice markets there as far as television is concerned, but I think you're going to lose some people that just don't want to stay up that late to watch the games. You know, you have people that have to go to work in the morning.
Yep.
And so I like an 11 o'clock game. It's going to be great for Rich Sutter. Going to be great for In the Zone. But for the average person, I don't see it being that advantageous. For the average person,
That was the problem
I
when
just don't
baseball
see-
went to interleague games. People didn't want to stay up and watch West Coast games.
We alluded to it a little bit, but again today the word regional keeps coming up.
Yeah.
Regional, and we got away from regional, and it doesn't have to get away from regional, but it's the people making the decisions now are malinformed about what people want to see. They might have run some surveys. They might have done some of these things that absolutely don't have anything to do with what actual people are looking for, what they want to see, and what they want to be watching on television. Again, I go back to ESPN. ESPN is now flexing its muscles because of all the compression that's coming from the top from Disney and all the other stuff. You see all of their staff being taken out and getting whacked. Now you're going to see all of their programming start to change as well. You're going to see them start to revert back, hopefully, to the things that made them what they are. And I'm gonna just go out on a limb and say this. They started out as a basketball corporation. That's how they made their bones. Gamblers were big ESPN people because you could get the scores right away. You could get all of that stuff right away. Now, ESPN still has that. But I don't know how many people would rather watch a really regional basketball game instead of pickleball. And I love cornhole. Get me a couple of beers in the backyard, and I'm your man. I'm your guy.
Right.
But does that have to be televised? Is that a sport now?
Listen, I was watching Major League Tag, basically. I swear to God. It's around this like parkour course, but it was tag.
It's all
What? I'm sitting there going,
like I said, you can become too big, and once you become too big, you become trying to become something for everybody. It's just go back to basketball, go back to baseball, go back to football. I know those contracts are expensive, but that's what people want to see. Cover it up and down the boulevard. All of these fill-in shows that they have are terrible. In the Zone, I swear to you, I've watched our show. I've watched their show. I think our information is so much better here. What they're trying to do is consider the fan, but also, as Pete alluded to, just using the show as a vehicle. You know, they're just using the show as a vehicle for advertising, for all different things. But right now, some of the stuff that's going on in those shows, it's just flat out terrible. It's just flat out terrible. And they'll have an opportunity to change now as well, too. But again, let's get back to the players because that's what I really get excited about the most when we talk college basketball. So you have a little bit of conversation that we had in previous show. We talked about what they consider to be the way too early top 25. Well, it's not way too early right now. Top 25 is a totally legitimate topic. We talked about it in our show a little bit last week. And what you're also going to see that we can illuminate to the fan is as we went through those coaches, as we went through those top salaries, now you're also going to see some of the best players also wind up playing for those coaches all the time. How does that happen? It happens because of the school, the reputation of the school. It will happen because of the reputation of the school, the coach, and it will happen also because of their ability to move players on to the next level. Kentucky is still relevant because John Calipari has an absolute laundry list of NBA players that are competing, earning huge contracts, and doing very, very well for themselves. So when you can point to that, that's always going to be relevant on the recruiting trail. And I think that's some of the sell that they have at Kentucky. One of the problems that Coach Calipari's having right now is they've had a lot of staff turnover, and they just don't play very good defense, to be honest with you. I've seen their teams play over the years and the years and the years. They just don't play very good defense. I've never seen one of his Kentucky teams that I thought came out 100% totally committed on the defensive end. They're very talented on offense, and that's why I think they lose in the NCAA tournament as early and as frequently as they have, is because of a total lack of commitment to defense. They should find somebody who can really teach defense because they have such great players. They have such great talent, and it's a shame sometimes to watch it because that great talent just goes to waste when you don't have a coach ready to mold them, ready to form them, and ready to challenge them. And I think John Calipari, he's a Hall of Fame coach and all those other things, but I don't think that's ever been his strength. And I think that they might need somebody next to him that has that strength. So let's go down through the list. Zach Edey is listed number one here as the number one player. I see that easily. I really am high on this young man. Not for any other factor that he's 7'4", 250 pounds. It reminds me of Yao Ming, who came into the game and had a very, very solid career. He had a very, very good career. So to me, is Zach Edey Yao Ming? I don't think so, but he's certainly going to be able to have a very good pro career. And right now, when you're looking at these draft boards, you're going to see so many hits and misses. A great player will land, and then a great player, they thought he was so good, and then he's not even going to be on a roster. And there's a couple of people we talked about like that on the show already. And so you'll see these hits and misses. And so what you're looking for, if you're NBA people, what you're really hoping for is that you can get into a situation where you're building your team every year and you're getting a solid player every year that can play in the NBA for a significant amount of time. You're also looking for players that will fit into your salary structure. Jaylen Brown gets $50 million. The last guy on the Celtics doesn't make that kind of money.
Not even close.
Not even in the millionth, not even within, some of the contracts that are on the lower level. They can have 10-day contracts. They can have some of these two-way contracts they talk about right now. But a lot of those contracts are significantly less because you're dealing with a salary cap. You're dealing with a finite number. And although there's a couple of wiggles in and around it, eventually the team has to make money too. And so the owners don't want to own the team to lose money, I don't think. I think they own these franchises because they want to be able to make money and have profitable franchises, and the Boston Celtics certainly should be one of those. But with the ability to sign your own player for whatever amount of money really that you want, that really is going to stress things on the revenue side. That's going to stress things on the other side, which then will only land at the lower end of your roster. That's the place it's going to land the most, is at the lower end of your roster. And you could have taken $10 million of the $50 million a year that goes to Jaylen Brown and dispense that to the bottom of your roster to create the depth that I think the Denver Nuggets have on their team right now.
Yep.
The Celtics are coming out again with a coach that has yet to be tested in NBA waters. They're coming out with exactly the same team that they had last year. Trade Porzingis for Marcus Smart, and there will be some variables in and around that. Marcus Smart was tough. Marcus Smart was a great team guy. Marcus Smart had his limitations offensively that Porzingis doesn't have, but in the NBA, over the course of all of that season, over the course of all of that games, competitiveness really matters the most. It's one of the reasons they said Jordan was the great player that he was, is because he was competitive about everything. He was competitive in practice. He was competitive in games. He was competitive about everything. And that's really where the whole thing boils down to. They have Hunter Dickinson. I know they gave him $2 million, so maybe they're factoring some of that in as him. They have him listed as the number 2 player. He's the $2 million man that Kansas signed.
It's
I
amazing.
will also, I've said this on the show, I think Hunter Dickinson played his cards really, really well. I think Hunter Dickinson went out, took a visit, got his first offer. I think he went to his second school, took a visit, and let them know the first number that they had. And so anybody who's looking to go through this portal kind of movement, and you're a high-profile player that can now command significant amount of NIL money, follow the Dickinson model. Follow his model, because by the time he got to Kansas, he had 2 offers in his pocket. All it was then, the only thing that was happening then with Kansas, with their people, was the number. That's the only thing that was in consideration right there.
He created
What
a bidding
do we
war.
have to bid to beat this?
Yep.
Exactly. The funny thing is, it's like you would think these are no-bid contracts, you know, but they can't be. They can't be. To advantage Dickinson, he has to make the number known. To advantage Dickinson, he has to tell them along the way, here's where I'm at. This is where I'm at. This is where we're at. And then Kansas can assess. Now, I guarantee you, I know the guys at Kansas, Norm Roberts, Freddie Cordelbaum. They've worked for Bill Self for a really, really long time. I can tell you that they probably knew the number going in long before that anybody came to them and told them the number. They'll follow it. They'll research it. They'll know exactly what that first offer was. They'll know what the second offer was, and they'll be ready. I know those guys. They're really good at what they do, and they're ready. They're ready and willing to keep that program exactly where it is, in the top 5 of college basketball for a really, really long time. They got, you know, arguably the best coach in the game right now, and they have people that are willing to put huge amounts of money to make sure that they stay there. And I can assure you that they did their diligence, and I can assure you that they were in this every step of the way. Okay. N'Faly Dante from Oregon is listed as their 3rd player. Not exactly a household name. Not exactly a name that everybody's going to know. They have Ryan Kalkbrenner down here from Creighton. This gentleman is somebody that I like in terms of next year's draft. Come back this year. He's a lot like Colin Castleton in the University of Florida. Now Castleton's trying to jump on with an NBA team, undrafted, trying to make an NBA team. I'm pretty sure Colin Castleton winds his way into the NBA for a really long time. I think Ryan Kalkbrenner will do the same thing. Returning to Creighton really positions them in a really, really great spot. And the funny thing about it is, when you look at what's going on out at Creighton, new Derek Kellogg, the UMass coach, is out there as an assistant coach. I think McDermott's a great X's and O's technician. When you look at what they're doing out there, that's pretty remarkable, because I think I've alluded to this on the show before. There are places in the NCAA that have a really rich talent base right within walking distance. What are some of those jobs? Georgetown, within walking distance. They have unbelievable talent, great talent right within that area. Now extrapolate out to, well, you can skip Delaware because there's never been a lot of basketball talent in Delaware. But now jump into New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and this area here, and step out a little bit to the other side, Georgetown can. Go to Virginia, which is great for talent. South Carolina, North Carolina, very good basketball talent. So to be centrally located matters. So let's take St. John's, fallen off a little bit. They've had recruiting troubles. Different coaches in and out, in and out. Now they went and they've got themselves the number one available free agent coach that was available to them, and Rick Pitino. Is he going to turn that program around? St. John's Nation is anxious. You can put down your brochures, put down all of your anxiousness, St. John's fans. You're going to turn this thing around, and it's going to get turned around really, really quick. St. John's, New York for years. New York for years lived St. John's in New York, St. John's in New York, back to when I was a young man. Bill Wennington, Chris Mullin, all of their players, Walter Berry, all of the great St. John's players, Omar Cook, Eric Barkley, Ron Artest. They had some great, great talent there, all New York players. All New York players. Now, New York's taken a little bit of a dive talent-wise, but they can step right into New Jersey, and Pitino will do that easily. They will step easily into New Jersey. They'll swing up to Connecticut. Massachusetts is lit up right now. New England is lit up for basketball right now. One of the things, my nephew, he went to a school in Texas, which was like a Friday night lights thing. And I said, what was one of your favorite things to do in high school? He said, we'd go up to the window and watch all of the football coaches come in. And all of the college football coaches would come into the door, and it'd be Lou Saban and all of these guys coming through the door. And they said it was awesome, And that's what New York used to be. For the coaches, all of them would come in. Every single coach would make that annual trip to New York. But New York's fallen off a little bit. St. John's can easily get in there. But right now you're looking at Massachusetts, Maine with Cooper Flagg, the number one player in the class, Maine. I'll tell you something else, too. He played on a team of all young men from Maine this AAU season, and they were unbelievable. They were unbelievable. They beat a lot of talented teams out there. And so there's some other good players in that area as well. Massachusetts is blowing up like crazy for basketball talent. It's really, really done well. But as we go back and we say, okay, let's go back with Kalkbrenner, Colin Castleton. What is the drawback with some of these gentlemen right now is that they're in that frame. They're so tall. They're so skinny that it's hard for them to keep weight on. And they're very, very talented players, but the bump and grind of the NBA is something quite different. So the challenge for both of those young men and a lot of these other young men out there, the big man at Florida Atlantic as well too, is to get on that strength and really, really maintain that strength level. Castleton and Kalkbrenner have the skill set to survive a little bit because they can both really shoot the ball really well. So if you have that skill set, you can kind of cheat it on the strength side because you can stay outside and you can shoot the ball. And teams like that now with their big guys. So they have that advantage. But, like when you're talking about Adamo Sanoga and some of the other players that were, centers in for UConn, played a five or maybe even a power forward at times. Those are the guys that really struggle in the NBA because they don't really have that outside skill set. And to be able to score around the basket in the NBA right now is unbelievably hard. I mean, there are so many big players down there. There's so many talented players down there. And all of the players are tall now. All of the players are really, really tall. And so it's very, very difficult to score in the low post and be effective down there. That's one of the reasons that they've taken it outside as much as they have. Because if you watch an NBA basketball game, the lane, it looks like 42nd Street, Manhattan, with all the skyscrapers around it. It's just really hard to move, and it's difficult to, that's why they run all those high ball screens, because that actually takes the big man away from the basket. All right, so we've got Kalkbrenner, we've got Johnny Broome from Auburn, really tough young man. Auburn has lost a lot. Arkansas has lost a lot. And so now you're seeing how these teams can reload, and can they reload. The NIL and the portal is allowing for some of that, but I alluded to this in the past, and I'll speak to it just for one quick second again. Team chemistry, Team integrity in basketball matters. And the teams right now that can fight through this, I think UConn's done an exceptionally good job of this. Teams right now that can fight through all of this hailstorm of portal and NIL and having such movement and such conference realignment moving back and forth, back and forth. I think the teams right now that can maintain their integrity and maintain their composure about their program, I think they're going to be really successful. I think some teams are going to be looking for that, brass ring. Let's grab it quick. We can, pull this guy in, and it's going to work. Kansas is trying to do it right now with Dickinson. He has 1 year remaining. This is a $2 million one-time shot deal, and they're going to try and pull that off. Is Bill Self a good enough coach to pull that off? Yeah, probably. But it's just not going to look the same. And you're going to lose that chemistry. And that's what college basketball, I'm afraid, folks, has always been built on. That's what people loved. There was a reason that Pete Carril could give any of the coaches in the big time fits with his little Princeton group of guys that came out there. He could just give them fits because he was a coaching genius. And they had tremendous, tremendous team chemistry. And they also were really, really intelligent players, too, by virtue of their acceptance into Princeton. And he was able to utilize that. And so any given night, he could take a team that was totally unmatched physically and find a way to keep them in that game. Find a way to give the other team just fits about what they were doing because of his coaching ability and his stuff. You don't see that much anymore. I don't know that you have that a whole lot in the game anymore. And, Carril kind of had it, and everybody wanted it. He just had this kind of way about him, and nobody could really figure out what he was doing. I don't even know if I know some guys that played for him, they just were like, you just listened to him, and, it was like nobody really,
you could step back and see the whole thing, right?
It was just more of a, it was more like a stream of consciousness, like more than it was a game plan. And so it was all based upon, the premises of what they would do as a smart, intelligent basketball team. But he, that's why he's famous. That's why he's one of the greatest of all time, in my mind, maybe the greatest of all time, coach of all time, because he was able to do that with a whole lot less than what everybody else had. And that's significant to me. Jesse Edwards, West Virginia. He's listed on the list here. And unfortunately, for our Syracuse fans that are listening out there, Jesse Edwards was at Syracuse last year and now transferred over to West Virginia. And I was good to see that Coach Autry has decided to get out of the 2-3 zone. Thank God. I think people in all of Western New York are rejoicing because the Boeheim 2-3 zone has been put to rest. And they'll get back to playing man-to-man basketball, get back to playing live matchup basketball, and getting out there and putting through an effort and really, really working hard at it. Basically, what the 2-3 zone was an absolute white flag surrender to the players that they would have at Syracuse because most of them were so gifted offensively. Carmelo Anthony, one of the most gifted players offensively that there has ever been in the game of basketball. We refer to that type of player as a bucket. He could score on anybody. He could score if he was in a barrel. He could still score. He could put the ball in the basket. Nobody will ever consider Carmelo Anthony one of the great defensive players of all time. Nobody. And that's the difference. You have to be able to play hard on both ends of the basketball. And that's what's been missing. And I think that's what's missing a little bit. When you talk about some of the players moving here and there, you're gonna see a lot of cohesion issues, defensive issues, assignments blown, like they talk in football. The safety was supposed to get him, but then the cornerback thought he was supposed to get him, and then they left this other guy wide open, and they were just in miscommunication.
Right.
Same thing happens in basketball. Basketball, your guy comes down a screen, You're going to go around the screen. You're going to stay with your man. Guys are going to be getting lost. Assignments are going to be blown. And you're going to be looking at a little bit more of a wide open show where the three-point ball is going to become the new thing. You'll see teams now start to shoot. I think that's the new thing. I think it is a little bit of a wave of the future. I think John Beilein came up to that realization a while when he was coaching, that if you can really work your players and teach them how to shoot, teach them how to really, really, really become adept and marksmen with the basketball in their hand so that they're going to make a high level of open shots. I think Beilein figured that out. It's just as easy for them to take a three as it is a two, and especially if the three is uncontested. And so we were just talking to it, when you're driving the basketball to the basket, you have all of those skyscrapers in there to contest with. That makes it a very, very difficult shot. There's nothing easier in the game than grabbing a basketball and dribbling in all by yourself and laying it off the backboard for a wide open layup. There's nothing easier than that. That doesn't happen in February. The defenses are set. They're back. They're rebounding. They're up and down the floor very, very quickly. They're doing a good job in transition defense. You're going to have to shoot the ball from the outside. And you're going to have to really, really have some guys that can do that. And so that's where I think now you're going to see the game at college kind of follow the NBA with that a little bit. You're going to see a lot more three-point shooting this year, I think. And one of the things I thought, again, if they would work with the game, I think there's such an amazing opportunity to turn college basketball into the greatest sports entity that's out there right now. It has always had a purity to it. It's always had an excitement to it. And right now, people love it. They love their bracket in March. They love their March Madness, and they go crazy for it. The way that I see things changing, I see them changing not for the better. And so that's where I feel that the fan, although you're still going to have these large contracts, you're just not going to have the same interest in it. Same chemistry around the team, same interest around the fan base. And I think that's something that's, it's sad. It's sad. Let's go back to the players. Armando Bacot, North Carolina. They're returning a group of players that had a huge run the year before into the national championship game, and they had a lot of their players returning, and it was a little bit odd that they struggled as much as they did last year. I'm really interested to see, because a lot of those players, Bacot, I don't know, maybe 28, 30, 35, he might have been drafted if he threw his name in. Maybe in a later second round, but I think he has the ability to get drafted. I think he came back another year. He's going to come back and lead the team. He's very limited in terms of some of the things he can do away from the basket, but around the basket, he's really terrific. He rebounds the ball great. If he catches it on the baseline, he's going to dunk it. His little post moves are a little incoherent for me, but he's a star that's coming back to the team. They have their backcourt's back. I'm interested to see, if that group can regroup. Sometimes a little bit of adversity causes you to regroup, and I'm interested to see if they can. Or some of the teams in that league are just catching them now. Duke's getting away from everybody, but there's some teams in that league that, that are kind of maintaining program integrity. They're maintaining their guys, and so I think you're going to see the middle of that whole thing be a mosh pit this year, the ACC. And the bottom of it's going to be rough. It's going to be rough at the bottom. So Bacot was listed. Tolu Smith from Mississippi State. He's a big somebody who can do a lot of things around the basket. Caleb Boone from UNLV. Omar Ballo. I like this young man from Arizona in next year's draft. That's a name. We are very high on Tubelis this year, and I want to put this name out there for you for next year's draft. I think Umar Ballo could be somebody who could be on an NBA first, maybe a late first round, maybe now if he improves, get better. But he's really tall.
Big boy, 7 feet, 260?
7 foot, 260, aircraft carrier, and he gets up and down the floor really well, runs the floor very well. of course, now you have two different types of center that are going into the NBA right now. Umar Ballo is B. All right. So the young men we talked about just previous are A. Let's talk about A first. Kalkbrenner, Colin Castleton, Nunge, the young man from Xavier, are all big 7-footers, 6'10". They can all shoot the ball away from the basket, though. They can get up and down. If they set pick and roll, high pick and roll, they're going to flare. They don't have to roll to the basket. They can keep the lane wide open, flare, and hit that open three. That's prototype A right now of the NBA center. And there's really only one other prototype that I can think of, and it's really B. And the B is the long, tall, shot blocking and rebounding center. This person is not an offensive consideration. They're going to come high and set ball screen after ball screen after ball screen on offense. Roll to the basket. If they're open for a dunk, the guard will catch it and give it to them. But they're not going to be on a pick and pop situation. They're not going to be on a flare situation where they can catch the ball away from the basket and hurt the defense with it. If the defense is looking at some of the prototype Bs, they're going to just not even cover them. They'll soften the lane, they'll play off in the lane, and they'll never come out to cover them. That's what you had with Shaquille O'Neal. Towards the end of his career with Shaquille O'Neal, the mantra was to include him in every single ball screen that you could possibly include him in. So that he has to come away from the basket. He's got to really move his feet, help and recover, and those are things that big guys generally don't do well and aren't good at. So those two prototypes, though, are where you're going to really see the center position move in the NBA. You're going to see that shooter, that five-man that can stretch the defense, keep the lane wide open for the guys that want to drive to the basket, bring the big man away from the basket, which is another plus of having that type of player, bringing the big away from the basket. But then you're going to have the prototype B as well. And in the prototype B, it's long, it's 7 foot, 7'1", long length, good wingspan, able to change and block shots that come in the lane, able to rebound, outlet the ball, get up and down the floor, and also set the high ball screen, because that's all they do now. That's some of the thing that's just boring to me also. Everything is high ball screen, high ball screen, high ball screen. And some of the things that, with all of the data and all of the calculations that you can do right now, it has to be it's a little staggering to me that coaches haven't seen that that's not working. It's got some value to it. But now what happens with coaching is somebody starts running the flex offense. Everybody is running the flex offense now. Bobby Knight wins the national title running motion offense. Two bigs on the block, down screen, cross across the lane. Everybody started doing it. Mike Krzyzewski continued that type of motion offense for many, many years at Duke. That's why the motion offense lasted as long as it did. John Calipari and Vance Wahlberg hatched this creation of dribble, drive, motion. Really wide open basketball floor. A really lot of shooters out on the perimeter. And just that type of game where you're sitting there and you're saying, okay, it's really difficult to guard everybody. You know, especially if you have quick players who can really get in and around on that dribble drive piece. The dribble drive piece is, we're going to have no real structure to this thing. And the dribble drive pieces, this is what I think as a coach, and this is what I think a lot of my colleagues might think as well too. The human brain is the computer. I'll say it again. The human brain is the computer. And the greatest players in the world have an advanced computer system in their brain that they can read everything like everybody else reads it and see a different result and see the correct result. I'll give you Tom Brady as an example. Physically, you look at Tom Brady and you would say, I don't know, NFL quarterback, we could find some guy 6'5" who can see over everybody. But then you say Tom Brady and you watch his decision making and you say, that's the computer at work. That's the whole thing. The basketball player has a computer in his brain as well. And the decisions are made at a much faster clip than Tom Brady's decisions are made at sometimes, because Tom Brady gets to go into a huddle every play and design the next play. In basketball, it goes up and down and up and down, and there's no design there. That's just players making that read and making that good assessment. And I think the good coaches allow that computer to work, and other coaches have a tendency to shut it down or cause buffering inside the computer, inside the player's brain. And you see that sometimes. And that's where, again, another offense comes out and dribble, drive, motion. Everybody now is high ball screen. And so there's really little variety. Every single program in Division I just about is running all of these high ball screens. Now, there's 40,000 different ways that you can move 4 players around and get to a different high ball screen any way you want. But at the end of the day, it's still a high ball screen. And it's still not involving all of your players to the best utilization of their abilities, in my opinion. And it also cuts down on your player's ability to drive. Dribble, drive, motion was based upon, let's spread the floor. Let's give our guys the ability to get around their man, create that penetration, because when a defense is penetrated, it's in trouble. And once we penetrate that defense, get them in trouble, now we open up option A, B, and C for us. And that's the part of it that's sometimes the reality of basketball is coaches get in the way sometimes. Coaches are involved too much sometimes, and you see it all the time. And we go back to the play calling that the Celtics had at the end of their playoff run there. Marcus Smart taking 3 of the last second shots that they had in those playoff games, which are going to decide to move on or not move on of your team, and it just, the ball wasn't in the right hands at the right time. And so, Pete, as we move on, what are we in the 2-minute range now?
Yeah, 2 to 3 minutes.
2 to 3 minutes. All right. So I wanted to talk about a little bit about some conferences and where they have, most notably, let's talk about UMass's conference right now, and then we can talk about the ACC a little bit as well too. There's some, obviously some great players that are in these conferences. What you're looking at also now is a lot of the players are coagulated into the power conferences. So this is how everything's going to funnel. This is how everything's going to go. And so the mid-major schools, it's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this for a minute. My alma mater, St. Bonaventure, we can start with that mid-major. They were picked second in the league this year. Dayton is picked first. St. Bonaventure was picked second. Now, this is obviously just a poll. But what I was surprised at, and this is what I alluded to in some of the shows, some of the mid-major programs are really going to struggle right now. St. Bonaventure has been able to maintain a little bit. I was surprised to see them pick second because several years ago they lost in the NIT final to Xavier, and the entire starting 5 was eligible to return to Olean for a great season, and every single one of their players was gone. Every single one of the players left to get an NIL deal at another school. Bonaventure struggled mightily last year because they had to import an entire new roster and import the roster from the NIL and import the roster from the portal. And so now you're forcing teams out into an area where, as a school, we can't even operate at that level. And so now you're going to see what's kind of flipped over in the A-10. In this poll, you had Richmond. They're having a little bit of an issue with their coach who's having some health issues, but they were perennially an Atlantic 10 really strong team, way down at the bottom, picked almost dead last. Davidson, Bob McKillop turns the program over to his son. Very similar situation to what I talked about with John Shire, with Hubert Davis. They picked his son, but there were 200 other resumes in the country better for that job than they did at Davidson than when they picked his son. And now they're about ready to finish in last place this year. And so you're talking about Davidson. UMass was really, really far down in the poll. And this is coach's second year there. I'm sure they're looking for some improvement, but they were way, way down in the poll. So you're talking about UMass was once a top 25 team.
Right.
Davidson, Steph Curry, they were NCAA perennial team. Richmond, another really storied Dick Tarrant, the old coach for the Richmond Spiders, Kenny Atkinson, and some great teams. Unbelievable. But those conferences are decimated right now, and it's going to filter down to lower Division I and really, I don't think they care because those games aren't on television.
Yeah.
And so it's sad. But Pete, awesome to be back with you. We're in the zone. We'll see you next week, and we'll have a whole lot more updates for you about the college basketball season and how things are going. Everybody have a great week. We'll see you next week.